Karlsson studies the effects of climate change on the Arctic environment. His research has shown that ongoing and projected global warming will have major effects on Arctic ecosystems. And the changes that impact the Arctic also have huge consequences on the rest of the globe.
Doris Carson's research focuses on population mobility, in particular the change in migration and tourism, and what that means for rural community development. One of her main questions is how growth in northern cities influences mobility and development in surrounding rural areas. She compares northern Sweden with other northern peripheries in Australia, Canada, and Alaska.
Cold temperature exposure is a constant threat to human health. Sick and injured individuals are particularly sensitive and vulnerable to cold exposure. Jonas has developed and tested a heated mattress designed for pre-hospital emergency care. This mattress has significant effects on sick and injured patients' thermal comfort and health.
Elena Lindholm studies representation of Northern Europe in Spanish media, travel books and popular literature from the early 1900s. Her research shows that progressive thinkers and intellectuals describe the Arctic as a fantasy place and as above all well-suited for modern society's freedom.
Bindler studies long-term climate changes and metal contaminants in subarctic areas, for instance in the Swedish mountains and on Greenland. He analyzes soil particles, pollen and pollutants in bottom sediments of lakes to get an impression of environmental changes, which have been in progress for over 1,000 years.
There are major differences in how countries in the Arctic region adapt to climate change and globalization. Carina Keskitalo examines how the Arctic region was developed, how forestry, reindeer husbandry and tourism handle seasonal shifts and extreme weather, and also how EU and Sweden develop policies and strategies for the Arctic.
Mats Eliasson is one of two principal investigators of the Monica study in northern Sweden, initiated by the World Health Organization. The study shows that the risk of suffering and dying from heart attack or stroke has decreased in the population, mainly because of the rapid decline in cholesterol levels and reduced smoking.
Anna-Lill Drugge explores how research ethics in indigenous research has developed in Sweden over the last decades. She connects Swedish Sami research to the wider Nordic and international indigenous contexts. She challenges mainstream academic research practice in order to accomplish a more ethically sustainable Sami research in the future.
Microorganisms in the Norwegian Sea have to adapt to unique conditions such as extreme variations in temperature and light. An international project Fredrik Almqvist is involved in studies bacteria that have been isolated from this extreme environment. And what they're looking at is what this bacteria can produce if they're allowed to consume coast streams from the fishery industry.
The supply and demand for services and products are increasing in the northern latitudes, such as in forestry, mining and in tourism. Linda Lundmark studies the consequences this has for labor and entrepreneurship in rural regions, and also how the development is affected by the urban concentration of power.
A large number of tularemia cases has occurred in northern Sweden in recent years. Anders Sjöstedt examines what makes the tularemia bacterium pathogenic and wants to find new ways of treating the disease. The research team has also developed a vaccine which they hope will be licensed.
Heidi Hansson's research concerns representations of the Arctic in travel literature, fiction and popular culture from the early 19th century to the present. A fundamental question is what kind of stories can be told about the Arctic, and what kind of stories the Arctic setting makes it possible to tell.
Thomas Olofsson studies energy efficiency, especially in cold climates, and sees that vast readjustments in society are required in order to mitigate the impacts of climate change. He also specializes in energy performance in buildings by studying energy use, heat loss, indoor thermal climate, and user awareness.
When the competition for natural resources and land intensifies, conflicts may arise between, for instance, landowners, public authorities, and organizations. Camilla Sandström investigates if various forms of regulation and partnerships can resolve conflicts and contribute to a long-term and sustainable use.
In the north of Sweden, many people are exposed to the cold at work and in their spare time. In the study Cold and Health in Northern Sweden, Jens Wahlström and his colleagues have collected data from more than 12,000 northerners. Their objective is to provide more knowledge about how cold exposure affects people's health. And the results show that, for instance, cold-related neurovascular hand symptoms have been commonly reported.
Dorrepaal examines how the special ecosystems found in Arctic areas are affected by the ongoing climate change. Her research has shown that a warmer climate may increase the turnover and release of stored carbon in the tundra soils. The consequences can be dramatic, as the world's tundra soils contain much more carbon than the atmosphere.
Örjan Pettersson examines regional development in northern Sweden and sparsely populated areas. In his research, he follows how the population is changing and how land and natural resources are used for wind power, mining and forestry.
Tourism has often been seen as a savior for peripheral communities in the north. But which role can the local industry play in sustainable development in the Arctic region? Müller studies the possibilities and the problems which can arise when tourism is developed in not least the Swedish Arctic.
Studying the interactions between climate change, ecosystem health and human well-being is becoming increasingly important. Birgitta Evengård's focus of interest is the changing boundaries of infectious diseases in the north. For example, the anthrax outbreak in northern Siberia that came as a consequence of changes to socio-ecological circumstances.
Patrik Lantto studies the political mobilization of the Sami and the Sami policy of the Swedish state. To fully understand today's Sami society, its many internal divides, as well as the relationship to the Swedish state, it is necessary to grasp the historical development and the actions of the state.
Northern Scandinavia hosts an excellent infrastructure for space research due to its location in the auroral zone and the mild climate. Asta Pellinen-Wannberg's research focuses on detecting small bodies in space, meteoroids that interact with the Earth's atmosphere. She also looks for fragments that have hit the ground as meteorites.
Per Axelsson studies the effects of colonization on indigenous people's health during the last 150 years. He wants to examine how colonization developed in Sweden, Australia and New Zealand, why the Swedish Sami's health has improved and why there still is such a huge gap regarding health between indigenous and non-indigenous people in New Zealand and Australia.
Lena Maria Nilsson examines how a traditional Sami or northern Swedish diet and lifestyle can affect public health. It's important to study this subject as long as cultural differences still exist. Her research has shown that women in the county of Västerbotten who drink a lot of boiled coffee have a reduced risk of breast cancer.
Anna Sten's research focuses on past, present and future uses of forest resources in the boreal north. She has studied long-lasting conflicts around berry harvesting and public access to forests. These and other conflicts highlight public opinions about social sustainability and rural development.
Philip Buckland uses fossil insect remains from archaeological and geological sites to study long-term changes in climate, environment and human activities. He also develops and manages open access databases which integrate these studies with data from a wide range of subjects, from ecology and climatology to history and literature studies.
Christer Stor studies storytelling as a cultural heritage in Sami communities in northern Sweden. He examines how the Sami have described major changes in their living conditions from the 1890s to the 1960s in the traditional yoik singing. In his latest work, he depicts how today's forest reindeer herders relate to the landscape from the perspective of the reindeer.
Kastahusa charano yo ellemalosa no yolo.